In this video, I'm going to discuss the Gnostic religion in a way that's accessible to someone who is an atheist. Whether or not you consider yourself a Gnostic or an atheist, or neither, I believe you'll find something stimulating and thought-provoking in this talk, as I discuss Gnosticism in a way that's compatible with atheism. I'm not advocating Gnosticism as a religion or belief system, or suggesting that anyone should take these myths literally. I believe stories and myths can be meaningful and can offer profound insights without being literally true. I think it's sad that so many atheists seem to have so little appreciation for myth, and that so many humanists have so little appreciation for the humanities. When a Christian accepts the Bible as literally true, and the atheist rejects the Bible as literally false, I think they both miss the point in some ways. For me, Gnosticism, and religious mythology in general, is about symbols and metaphors that express philosophical and psychological truths. Reflection on these symbols and metaphors can give us insight into ourselves and our experience of the world. If you read Shakespeare or Dostoevsky and believe their stories as literally true, you've missed the point. If you read great works of literature and poetry and reject them as historically and scientifically inaccurate, you've also missed the point. And maybe even more so than the person who took it all as literal truth. To begin with, I'll give a brief overview of the general Gnostic view. Keep in mind, there are a lot of different sects that are identified as Gnostic, and there are a lot of differences between them. There are a lot of different modern interpretations and opinions on what true Gnosticism is. This is just my general interpretation of a composite version of the various Gnostic myths. The world we live in is basically evil. Life is suffering. Our souls are like prisoners trapped in matter. The material world is a prison. The world wasn't created by an all-knowing, loving deity. It was made by an ignorant, arrogant, and sometimes evil demigod who wants to keep us enslaved. He and his appointed rulers, archons, want our blind obedience and submission. They want to keep us in ignorance. They want us to remain ignorant of who and what we really are, of where we came from, and of the true nature of our present condition. But there's another world beyond this one. The true, perfect world is hidden from us. We've been separated from it. This world is a kind of illusion, and we can escape this illusion. Liberation comes through a certain kind of knowledge, gnosis. Although the rulers of this false world do everything they can to keep us from attaining this knowledge, messengers from the real world face great danger in order to offer us this forbidden knowledge. This knowledge has to do with knowing ourselves, discovering the divine spark within us, and awakening to the realization that we are all part of the One. To an atheist, even that abridged version may sound pretty far-fetched if they're still stuck in a literal mindset. But if you really reflect on this, it's pretty much in line with the view of most atheists. Atheists argue against the existence of the Abrahamic God by pointing to all the suffering and evil in the world as evidence that no good and loving God could have created this world. Richard Dawkins wrote a book titled The Blind Watchmaker. That could just as easily be the title of a Gnostic book about the blind, ignorant creator of the world. The only difference, really, is that the Gnostics personify this blind creative force as the mythical demiurge. It's the modern scientific materialist view expressed in pre-modern mythical language. Atheists devote a lot of time to exposing the God of the Bible as an evil, tyrannical, and ignorant being. Gnostics noticed that long before Christopher Hitchens or Sam Harris were ever born, and made pretty much the same exact criticisms way back then. When the so-called new atheists point to the imperfection of creation, the problem of suffering, and the evil and ignorant nature of the God of the Bible, they're just echoing the ancient Gnostics. When atheists criticize religious people for clinging to faith rather than seeking knowledge, again, the Gnostics agree. Of course, the problem for atheists is the other part, about humans as spirits imprisoned in matter, and the part about liberating your spirit from this world of matter and returning to the world of light. Atheists reject belief in anything like a soul or divine spirit within man. They don't believe in any other world beyond this one either. But again, myths don't need to be taken literally. I'm not arguing for or against the literal existence of a spiritual substance within man that's separable from the body. I'm not arguing for or against the literal existence of a realm of light beyond this material plane. For now, let's leave that question aside and just consider this as myth and try to see the truth to which it points. Let's think about the soul. I should mention that in the Gnostic view, man has a body, soul, and spirit. The soul and spirit are two different concepts in Gnosticism. For the sake of this discussion, it's not that important though. I also want to make it clear that I'm not trying to prove the existence of the soul in any objective scientific sense. That's a separate discussion. I'm only saying that the soul at least exists in a subjective sense. It's experientially real. No matter what you know or believe about biology and neuroscience, you experience yourself as something other than your body. When you say I, you're really not talking about your physical body. You're referring to the consciousness that experiences the world through your body. You say that it's your body. It's yours. It belongs to you. It isn't you. It's something you possess. It's something you inhabit. It's also something you're sort of trapped within and can't escape from. I'm not saying it's a scientifically verifiable description of the way things objectively are. I'm just asking you to recognize that this is true in terms of how you experience being in the world. If your hands go numb, you might say, I can't feel my hands. You've lost the feeling of being inside that part of your body. Now, someone may say that consciousness is just activity in the brain, and I'm not arguing against that position, but that isn't your experience. You experience your consciousness as filling your entire physical form, and not just the inside of your skull. When your brain activity stops, the brain is still there, but consciousness isn't. You are no longer inside the body. The brain is still inside the body, but the mind isn't. It doesn't matter whether you call it mind, consciousness, spirit, or whatever. The immaterial something that you experience yourself as being is not there, despite the fact that nothing physical has been removed. This doesn't mean you're a ghost floating around. Maybe the soul dies with the body. Maybe consciousness is purely a product of brain activity. That's fine. I'm not trying to prove or disprove that. I'm only pointing you to your inner experience. And this fact is so obvious I won't labor the point. If anyone insists to me that they are an unconscious being with no mind, I'm not sure how to argue with them. But I can't deny the direct experience of my own consciousness, or the feeling of being something other than the body I inhabit. For myself, the existence of my own soul as an experiential reality is the one thing I am absolutely certain of. If you challenge me to prove to you that I exist, and by I mean my soul, my consciousness, I'm not sure how I would do that. And I'm not sure how you could prove to me that you exist, and by you I mean your soul, your consciousness. But you know you do. You can't doubt it. If you doubt it, who is doubting? There has to be a doubter. There has to be a conscious intelligence to doubt the existence of conscious intelligence. So your mind is real. Maybe your body isn't real. Maybe you're dreaming right now, and your body is just part of the dream. When you dream at night, you dream that you have a body, but that body you inhabit inside your dream only exists in your mind. It deceives you. You experience it as being solid matter, but it's only a mental projection. What you experience as material reality within your dream is all just a mental projection that only exists within your mind. Only the mind itself is objectively real. So how can you have any faith in your belief that this material reality is any different? That it's not also the mental projection of a mind, which you yourself, as you perceive yourself to be, are also a mental projection of. So you can't be certain of the existence of your body or of the material universe, but you can't doubt the existence of your own consciousness. So which requires more faith? To believe in what you can't be certain of, or to believe in what you can't doubt? Someone could argue that it requires greater faith to be a materialist and to deny the existence of an immaterial principle within man than it does to be a Gnostic or metaphysical idealist, and to deny that material reality is the only reality that exists, or even to deny that it exists at all. Similarly, many people find it completely absurd that even in principle, consciousness could somehow emerge from an unconscious universe. Without being able to prove that mind arises from matter, rather than matter arising from mind, why would anyone assume that the chicken came from the egg, instead of assuming that the chicken laid the egg? And this is a question that science can't answer. What scientific test could you perform in a dream world that could prove whether or not you were inside of a dream world? Having only my own subjective experience and my ability to reason, I can only say that one position is more consistent with my sense of reason and direct experience than the other one is. But I can't appeal to faith, and I can't claim to have knowledge beyond what I have. Sometimes knowledge is knowing what you don't know. And I simply don't know that the material world exists independently of the mind, or is anything more than a mental experience within the mind. But I know that consciousness exists. Considering this, philosophy and psychology, especially depth psychology and phenomenology, are really the hard sciences. And subjects like biology, chemistry, or geology are really the soft sciences, contrary to mainstream opinion. And for me, Gnosticism is philosophical and psychological, not religious. So there's no contradiction between being a Gnostic and being a rational, scientific-minded atheist. Existentialist philosophers have written about feeling like a stranger in the world. Surely no one would read a novel by Albert Camus and think that the story was intended to be a factual account of actual characters and historical events. But we may find that stories like The Plague or The Stranger resonate with us. There's something in them that matches up with our inner experience. Have you ever had the feeling that you don't belong here, that this world is not your home? Have you ever felt the yearning deep inside for something beyond this world that doesn't seem to exist? I think that as humans we all feel this way. I think that's why religions and cult leaders who prey on these feelings are so successful at attracting followers. I also think we all feel we're prisoners in some sense. I think we all feel that the world is largely governed by ignorant, evil, deceptive, and oppressive forces, even if we don't believe in a literal demiurge or archons. But again, I'm not advocating any literal belief in a demiurge or archons. Let's think about it from a more psychological or archetypal perspective. I see the demiurge as a metaphor for the ego. The demiurge thinks he's God. He wants to mold the world to suit him. He wants others to do his will. Does that sound like anyone you know? If you're honest, doesn't it sound like you sometimes? Most people are ruled by their ego. They're ruled by the demiurge, or the false god. The archons can be seen as lower impulses that rule over you, or even possess you sometimes. Do you always live your life as a completely free being who acts totally rationally and morally in accordance with your will? Or are you a slave to your fleshly desires and irrational instincts, or unconscious drives or social conditioning? Is this the only way of existing that's possible? Or is there a higher level of being available to you? Doesn't it feel sometimes that you have a spiritual nature that's at war with your fleshly nature? You don't need to believe in the literal existence of souls as some kind of supernatural things to recognize that this is true in an experiential sense. For me, the Gnostic myth is about the struggle to overcome those forces inside myself that seem to have power over me. It's about liberating my true self from these forces. It's about achieving wholeness instead of experiencing myself as a fragmented being whose broken pieces are in constant war with each other. Most people are filled with warring desires. They want to lose weight and get in shape, but they also want to eat junk food and watch TV. They want freedom, but they also want security. They want to save money, but they also want to spend it on things they don't need. Which of these opposing desires comes from your true self, and which comes from your false self? Which one is you? Who are you, really? Your true self is the one who transcends these opposites and chooses between them. It's possible to think of the pleroma as a psychological state of wholeness. It may not be so much about being liberated from all desire, as some Buddhists say, but more about being liberated from opposing desires and being one, being of one mind. It's about freeing your true self from the power of your false self and the false world it creates in which you're trapped and in which you experience suffering. Just as in Plato's Republic, he compares the governing of oneself to the governing of the state. We can consider the individual as a microcosm of the world, and the world as a macrocosm of the individual. This is where a myth can take on several layers of meaning. It's a metaphor for yourself, but it's also a metaphor for the world in which you live. The demiurge and the archons become metaphors for the powers and authorities of church and state, or the banks, corporations, mass media, and academic institutions. Throughout history, kings and priests and other tyrants have enslaved humanity in a number of different ways. They've tried to keep man in ignorance. They've tried to force men into blind obedience. This is what the Gnostic story expresses through myth. If you read Rousseau, Thomas Paine, or any of the Enlightenment thinkers, you'll find very Gnostic ideas and themes. The picture of the noble savage, or man in a state of nature, is very different from the world in which they found themselves. Somehow humanity, born free, had found itself in chains. That's what the Gnostics expressed. Enlightenment thinkers imagine a past age in which man was free. Man was pretty much one with nature. There were no slaves and no masters. There was no government. There was no church. There was no private property. There were no banks, no corporations. This idealized image of humanity's past is very similar to the Gnostic pleroma. The pleroma existed before the false god created this false world and trapped spirits in material bodies where they suffer. The fall can be seen as the birth of agriculture, primitive accumulation, and the social organization related to the overseeing of the surplus produced. You begin to see concentrations of wealth and concentrations of power. You begin to see class division. You begin to see hierarchical structures in which the majority of people are essentially slaves to a ruler who makes himself out to be God, and the governors he appoints to rule under him. In mythical terms, this is the coming into being of the demiurge and his archons. The Gnostics see the rulers of mankind as false gods. They recognize that the true God, the One, or a divine spark, existed inside each of them. This is a statement of the sovereignty of each individual. It doesn't need to be taken literally or to mean anything beyond that. Similarly, Enlightenment thinkers held that all men are created equal and have certain natural, inalienable rights. We're all sovereign individuals. We're all gods, and we're all equal with those who make themselves out to be gods over us, and who place themselves above us in the position of priests and kings. So I find quite a few parallels between Gnosticism and Enlightenment thinking and modern humanism. Orthodox Judaism, Christianity, and Islam seem to be natural allies with tyrants. This isn't surprising since followers of these religions blindly worship a tyrannical deity. Gnostics, on the other hand, call the tyrannical deity evil and rebel against him. Atheists don't believe this tyrannical deity actually exists, and I don't either in a literal sense. But let's go back to experiential reality for a minute and leave that question aside. Imagine that you're in a Nazi concentration camp. You're about to be sent to the gas chamber. Now let's add a twist. Let's imagine that Hitler doesn't really exist, but for whatever reason, all the Nazi prison guards believe he exists, and that he wants them to shoot you if you try to escape, and that he wants them to take you to the gas chamber, or execute you, or use you for forced labor. What difference does the objective existence of Hitler make? The fact of his non-existence would be completely irrelevant to your experience of reality. It's as if he exists, even though he doesn't. The same is true of Allah. It doesn't matter whether this monstrous deity actually exists or not. The 9/11 hijackers believed he existed, and that he wanted them to fly planes into buildings and kill thousands of innocent people. In this sense, the demiurge and his archons are very real. Followers of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all worship and obey this false god. It doesn't matter if this god exists or not. Even if he doesn't exist in the real world, he is capable of affecting the real world through people. Their faith, in effect, makes him real. So this is my proof of the existence of God. 9/11, the Inquisition, the Crusades, the war against science, and the violent opposition and resistance of the state to the people's struggle for liberty and individual rights. This is all the work of the demiurge and his archons. If a gun that doesn't exist can shoot real bullets, the gun is real as far as I'm concerned. Again, this isn't an argument about the existence or non-existence of God in the way this question is typically discussed. It's completely inconsequential whether God exists. But I also hold that it's inconsequential whether the one or the pleroma exist. Its potential exists inside us. Our thoughts, our words, and our actions can manifest it, just as the thoughts, words, and actions of the followers of the demiurge have manifested him. In the same way, the light can shine in this darkness through us, and if a non-existent candle can light a room, the candle is real as far as I'm concerned. Maybe man's spirit doesn't exist, but if my non-existent spiritual nature is able to overcome my fleshly nature, then which is more real? What if instead of experiencing yourself as separate from everyone and everything else, you could experience yourself as one with everyone and everything else? Why is one experience more valid than the other? Which one would you choose? If enough humans experience themselves as being in a state of oneness rather than separateness, what kind of world would come into being? Of what consequence is it whether heaven exists, if heaven is manifested through us on earth? So become light, and let there be light.